My name is Eliza, and for 5 years, my in-laws have called me the girl who just stays home. They thought they knew me, the quiet, sometimes clumsy wife of their golden son, Thomas. I was the one who made the soup that was a little bland, the one who asked too many simple questions, the one with an unremarkable wardrobe who never seemed to contribute much to their sophisticated family discussions. To my mother-in-law, Eleanor, I was a pleasant, but ultimately replaceable accessory to her son's successful life, a glorified nanny and maid. They never knew the truth about my life before Thomas, or even the small, highly demanding work I did from my quiet home office. They saw a woman in yoga pants and a worn sweater, sipping coffee. They never saw the world-class editor who had shaped the books they loved, the books they constantly name-dropped at their parties. My father-in-law, Richard, a retired history professor, was the worst. He was currently writing his magnum opus, a dense, self-important historical novel, and was struggling to find a publisher, a fact he blamed on the decline of literary standards. He talked endlessly about his brilliant, but elusive, editor, a legend in the publishing world known only by the pseudonym Sterling. Sterling was notoriously demanding, working with only 1 or 2 major projects a year, and her approval guaranteed a bestseller. Richard had sent his manuscript to her a year ago and, naturally, been rejected. He still spoke of Sterling with a mix of awe and resentment, not realizing the woman he constantly disparaged sat right across his dinner table. The dinner where everything changed was at my and Thomas's house. It was a formal affair to celebrate Richard's latest, unsuccessful attempt to woo a prestigious publisher. "Eliza, darling," Eleanor purred, looking at my simple black dress, "you really should consider returning to work. Something small, perhaps a book club? Anything to get out of the house. A woman needs something to talk about besides dusting." Richard chuckled, stirring his wine. "Yes, Eliza. It would give you a bit more intellectual gravity. You know, like my editor, the woman who rejected me, Sterling. Now that is a mind. She's a genius. Ruthless, but brilliant. I hear she charges more for a single-line edit than I make in a semester. The mystery is who she is." He leaned in conspiratorially. "I tried to call the publishing house to get a number. Apparently, the only contact is an anonymous email. Can you believe it? She just stays home all day, but somehow, she's got the power." He looked at me, his eyes full of condescension. "Imagine that, Eliza. A housewife with power." My husband, Thomas, looked at me nervously, trying to change the subject. He knew a piece of the truth. He knew I did some editing work from home for an international publisher, but I had never told him the scale or the specific name. I smiled, a tiny, almost shy smile. "Professor Richard, I'm sorry you were rejected. That must be frustrating." "Frustrating," he scoffed. "It's infuriating. The arrogance of this Sterling woman. Her rejection letter was a single paragraph, utterly dismissive of my life's work. I swear, the only person who could write something so cold and concise would be some ancient, bitter hermit who hasn't left her desk in 20 years. Eleanor nodded. "Absolutely. They have no grace, Richard. No social charm. Unlike you, Thomas, and your charming, if unaccomplished, wife." I took a sip of water and set the glass down calmly. "You're right, Richard," I said, my voice steady, though still quiet. The rejection was concise. It said your argument on the Tudor succession was historically unsubstantiated, grammatically disjointed, and structurally a mess. The room went silent. Eleanor looked puzzled. Richard's face went white. How do you know what the rejection letter said?" he stammered, dropping his fork. "Because, Professor," I replied, finally meeting his gaze, "I wrote it." The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. "What are you saying, Eliza?" Eleanor whispered, her tone shifting from condescension to panic. I stood up, adjusting the plain, black dress. "I'm saying that for the last 20 years, before I met Thomas, and continuing in the early mornings while you thought I was folding laundry, I have been working under the pseudonym Sterling. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to an email. Your manuscript was one of the 2 I reviewed that year. I spent exactly 3 hours on it, not because I was bitter or ancient, but because my standards are very high, and your work, frankly, did not meet them. Richard, the great professor, was trembling. But you're just a housewife. You said you worked for a small publisher. I am a housewife who also happens to be the Chief Developmental Editor for the Westminster Global Group, I clarified, naming the largest, most prestigious, and most selective publishing house in the world, the one Richard had been trying to impress for decades. The only reason I work from home and take only 2 projects is that I can charge 7 figures for those 2 projects. My last project was the memoir of a sitting prime minister. My current fee is $5,000 per hour. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed. She looked from me to the elegant dining table setting, a setting I had purchased with a single morning's pay. The sterling you admire, the one who possesses all the intellectual gravity you wished I had, I continued, is the one who also does your laundry, mends Thomas's socks, and, apparently, made the soup that was a little bland. Richard sat back down, defeated. The man who had spent the evening dismissing me had just been rejected, face to face, by the professional he idolized, and humiliated by the woman he had treated like a maid. You lied to us, Richard croaked, using the same words Alara's father-in-law had used in the previous story. I didn't lie, I corrected him, maintaining my quiet, editor's precision. I simply allowed you to edit your own perception of me, and you made a very poor, very judgmental choice. I let you see the clothes, the dishes, and the simple life, and you filled in the blanks with contempt. I wanted to see if the great professor and the socialite had any humility or kindness for someone they thought was inferior. You failed the test. I looked directly at Eleanor. The difference between us is that I chose to stay home because I can afford the privilege of my time. You, on the other hand, constantly feel the need to prove your worth by wearing your wealth and diminishing mine. I turned to my husband, Thomas, who was watching the scene in a stunned daze. Thomas, I love you, and I apologize for the full truth. I only revealed it tonight because they crossed a line. I picked up the simple napkin and put it next to my plate. I think this dinner is over. You'll find a generous tip for the caterers on the kitchen counter, which I'll charge to my corporate account. I gave my in-laws one final, firm look. Now, if you'll excuse me. I have a best-selling author waiting for my next single-paragraph rejection. I walked away from the table, leaving Richard and Eleanor alone with their shame, the silence, and the devastating knowledge that the housewife they had just humiliated was not only wealthier and smarter, but the intellectual powerhouse who held the keys to their greatest ambition. What should Eliza's next move be? Now that the truth is out, how do you think Eliza should handle her in-laws and her husband moving forward? Should she maintain distance? Keep her professional and private life separate and simply let her in-laws stew in their shame, maintaining a polite but distant relationship? Use her power. Directly use her influence to either help or hinder Richard's future publishing attempts based on how they behave toward her. Address the husband. Focus on the relationship with Thomas and whether he knew enough to stop his parents' behavior.